I stared at the text message not meant for my eyes. Can't wait for Paris next weekend. She thinks I'm at a conference in Boston. 15 years of marriage was about to meet my perfect revenge. Like this video if you believe karma should come with a legal contract, and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold. Trust is the foundation of marriage. But what happens when it crumbles beneath lies? I remember the exact moment my world stopped spinning. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unusually quiet in our suburban home. The kids were at soccer practice, and I was preparing dinner when David's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, and I glanced over, thinking it might be work. We'd been married for 15 years. 15 years of building a life together, of Christmas mornings and summer vacations, of holding hands through 2 difficult pregnancies and the sleepless nights that followed. 15 years of inside jokes, shared dreams, and the comfortable silence that comes when you truly know someone. Or at least, when you think you do. I met David in my final year of college. He was 3 years older, already working at a marketing firm, confident in a way that made my stomach flutter when he approached me at my friend's birthday party. "You're the only person here who isn't pretending to have fun," he'd said, handing me a drink. I find that refreshingly honest. We were married 18 months later in a garden ceremony that my mother thought was too simple and his mother thought was too expensive. The compromise seemed to symbolize our relationship. Practical but with moments of whimsy, grounded but with ambitions. We moved into our first apartment, a 1-bedroom walk-up with uneven floors and a temperamental refrigerator, but it was ours. We'd spend Sundays at flea markets, finding treasures among other people's discards, slowly building our home piece by piece. When Alex was born, we moved to a small house in the suburbs. Emma followed 2 years later. I scaled back my graphic design work to part-time, creating a home office in what should have been a dining room. David's career flourished. Promotions, raises, business trips that grew more frequent as the children grew older. I was proud of him. Proud of us and what we'd built together. What I saw instead changed everything. Can't wait for Paris next weekend. She thinks I'm at a conference in Boston. My hands trembled as I set the phone down exactly where he'd left it. 15 years. 2 beautiful children. A home we'd built together, choosing every paint color, every piece of furniture with care. All of it now felt like a carefully constructed lie. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt something cold and determined settle into my chest as I continued chopping vegetables for the pasta sauce he loved so much. When David came downstairs, hair still damp, I smiled and asked about his day. He kissed my cheek, completely unaware that I had just discovered his betrayal. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made my decision. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. The next morning, while he was at work, I called my sister, Janet, an attorney specializing in divorce law. "Rebecca," she said when I told her what I discovered, "don't do anything rash. Collect evidence. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't let him know that you know." And so began my double life. On the surface, I was the same Rebecca Morgan, devoted wife, caring mother, part-time graphic designer working from our home office. But beneath that facade, I was becoming something else entirely, a private investigator in my own marriage. For the next 3 months, I documented everything with meticulous precision. I became someone I barely recognized, part detective, part actress, wholly determined. I created a secure email account he knew nothing about, where I forwarded bank statements showing unexplained expenses. I photographed receipts I found in his jacket pockets, installed a discreet tracking app on our shared family iPad that automatically backed up his text messages, and kept a detailed journal of his comings and goings. I noted the dates of business trips that never appeared on his company calendar, information I gleaned by casually mentioning to his assistant how difficult it was to keep track of David's schedule. "Oh, I know what you mean," she'd said over coffee, clearly thinking she was commiserating with a fellow scheduler. Especially with the Boston conference next month not even being on the official calendar yet. Boston. Just like the text had mentioned. Only David had told me he was going to San Francisco. Each new discovery was like a knife twist, reopening the wound of betrayal. The Valentine's Day I'd spent with the children while he claimed to be at a client dinner, only to find a hotel charge in Boston on our credit card statement. The time he'd called to say his flight was delayed, background noise clearly indicating he was in a restaurant, not an airport terminal. The business dinners that ran inexplicably late, from which he returned smelling of unfamiliar perfume that he attributed to clients or colleagues. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Marta with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I paid her from a small account I'd maintained separately throughout our marriage. For Christmas surprises, I'd always told David with a wink. He never questioned it, one of many ways he'd underestimated me over the years. Most spouses wait too long, Marta told me during our first meeting in a coffee shop 3 towns over. They suspect for months, sometimes years, before they do anything. By then, the evidence is cold. Mine isn't, I assured her, sliding an envelope across the table containing David's travel itinerary for the following month. Marta was worth every penny. Within weeks, she provided me with photographs. David and a blonde woman holding hands across a restaurant table, kissing in a hotel lobby, entering an elevator together. Hotel receipts for rooms booked under his company name. Credit card statements showing lavish gifts, a gold bracelet from Tiffany's, designer perfume from Nordstrom, silk lingerie from an exclusive boutique, none of which had ever found their way to my wrist, my vanity, or my drawer. The most damning evidence came in an audio recording from a restaurant where David and the woman Carla, I now knew, were discussing their future. "What about Rebecca?" Carla had asked, her voice slightly muffled but distinct. "It's complicated," David had replied. "The kids, the house. But we'll figure it out. I just need some time." I listened to that recording only once, my hands shaking as I held the earbuds in place. It was enough. That night, I slept in the guest room, claiming a headache. It was the first lie in what would become months of necessary deception. All the while, I smiled across the dinner table each night, asked about his colleagues, his projects, his stress levels. I packed his suitcase for his conferences, pressing his shirts the way he liked. I was the perfect wife, even as I planned to dismantle our marriage with surgical precision. "You're so understanding," he told me one evening, kissing the top of my head as I curled against him on the sofa, watching a movie I couldn't focus on. "Tom's wife gives him the 3rd degree every time he has to travel." I smiled up at him. "I trust you," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Why would I make your life difficult?" Little did he know how difficult his life was about to become. As the evidence mounted, I consulted with Janet more frequently. We met for coffee at places far from our usual haunts, where no mutual friends might spot us and mention it to David. "You have enough," she confirmed after reviewing my collection. "More than enough. But if you want to maximize your position." She didn't need to finish. I knew exactly what she was suggesting. A plan began to form, a plan that would require patience, acting skills I didn't know I possessed, and perfect timing. In late March, David announced another conference in San Francisco. 3 days, he said, checking his calendar. From the 15th to the 17th. I nodded sympathetically. "You work so hard," I said, massaging his shoulders as he sat at our kitchen island. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "You know, with all your traveling, I've been thinking maybe we should update our wills and financial arrangements. Just to be safe." He turned to look at me, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might see through my suggestion. But then he smiled, relief evident in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I was finally taking an interest in financial planning, something he'd suggested for years and I'd always delayed. "That's actually a good idea," he said. "I'll set something up with Richard." Richard was our family attorney, who had handled our house purchase and wills years ago. "I already called him," I said with a smile. "He can see us tomorrow at 4. I hope that works with your schedule." Of course it worked with his schedule. David was eager to appear cooperative, especially with his San Francisco conference approaching. The conference I now knew was actually a weekend in Napa Valley with his mistress, Carla, a marketing executive from a partner company. I'd seen the booking confirmation in his deleted emails folder, which he never realized I could access. The next day, we sat in Richard's office. I'd arrived 30 minutes early to brief Richard on what I needed, slipping him documentation of David's infidelity that Janet had helped me prepare. Richard, a 60-something family man with daughters my age, had been professionally cordial but personally cold toward David after seeing the evidence. "So, just some updates to your estate planning and financial arrangements," Richard said, sliding documents across his broad mahogany desk. "Nothing major, just clarifications and modernizations to reflect your current assets." What David didn't know, what Richard carefully avoided mentioning, was that buried within the standard legal language was a post-nuptial agreement that would be triggered by proven infidelity. The agreement would grant me 75% of our assets, full ownership of our home, and substantial alimony in the event of divorce. David barely glanced at the documents, his attention repeatedly drawn to his phone, where text messages from Carla kept arriving. I watched his face soften each time he read one, the same expression he'd once reserved for messages from me. "All looks standard," he murmured, scrawling his signature where Richard indicated. He didn't even use the sticky tabs I'd seen other clients use to mark places needing signatures. He trusted Richard, and by extension, me, completely. The irony wasn't lost on me. As we left Richard's office, David took my hand. "That wasn't so bad, was it? You've been putting that off for ages." I squeezed his hand and smiled up at him. Sometimes the things we avoid aren't as difficult as we imagine. He had no idea how true that statement would prove to be. The day David left for his supposed San Francisco conference, I waited until his Uber pulled away from our driveway before springing into action. I'd arranged everything in advance. The locksmith arrived within the hour, changing every lock in our home. The moving company came next, carefully packing David's belongings according to my instructions. I labeled each box meticulously, one final act of wifely organization. His clothes went into garment boxes, his books into small, manageable cartons. I was careful with his collection of vinyl records, his signed baseball memorabilia, his favorite whiskey glasses. I wasn't cruel, just methodical. These things were moved to a storage unit I'd rented in his name, the first month prepaid. Our children, Alex and Emma, were spending the weekend at my parents' house, a planned visit that conveniently coincided with what was about to unfold. They were 13 and 11, old enough to understand the concept of divorce but young enough that I wanted to shield them from the immediate fallout. On Sunday evening, the day of David's return, I sat in our living room, my living room now, waiting. I'd prepared everything. Divorce papers were taped to the front door in a waterproof sleeve, along with copies of all the evidence I'd gathered and the post-nuptial agreement bearing his signature. I'd rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm. But when I heard his key scraping unsuccessfully against the new lock, when I heard his confused voice calling my name, I found myself frozen on the sofa, unable to move. Through the bay window, I watched his expression change as he found the envelope. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to understanding, and finally to defeat in the span of 30 seconds. He looked up at the house, our Tudor-style home with the red door I'd insisted on, and for a moment, our eyes met through the window. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply held his gaze until he looked away, pulling out his phone, presumably to call his lawyer. He didn't try to come in. Perhaps the evidence was too damning, or perhaps he recognized the distinctive handwriting on the legal documents, my sister Janet's firm but flowing script. Either way, he got back into his waiting Uber and disappeared. The calls came later, of course. Angry at first, then bargaining, and finally resigned. I let them all go to voicemail, responding only via email, always copying both our lawyers. His attempts to contest the divorce were futile. The evidence was irrefutable, and his own signature on the post-nuptial agreement sealed his fate. His lawyer, after reviewing the documentation, advised him to settle quickly before more damages accumulated. The day of our mandatory settlement conference was surreal. I chose my outfit carefully that morning, a navy blue dress that I'd worn to countless dinner parties where I'd played the role of supportive wife, listening to David's colleagues discuss their business ventures while I refilled wine glasses and asked polite questions about their children. It seemed fitting to wear it now, as I formally ended that chapter of my life. Janet met me outside the attorney's office, squeezing my hand before we walked in. "Remember," she whispered, "this isn't personal for them. It's just business. But it's your life. Stay focused on what matters." What mattered was securing my children's future. What mattered was reclaiming my dignity. What mattered was ensuring that the years I'd invested in our family weren't simply discarded like an inconvenient receipt. David was already seated when we entered the conference room. His lawyer, a silver-haired man with an expensive watch and permanent frown lines, leaning close and whispering something in his ear. David looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. Uncertain, vulnerable, genuine. Then his corporate mask slipped back into place. "Rebecca," he nodded, professional as if greeting a colleague. "David," I responded, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The meeting proceeded with clinical efficiency. Numbers were discussed, assets divided, custody arrangements outlined. I remained calm throughout, speaking only when necessary, letting Janet handle the legal maneuvering. It wasn't until the end, when the lawyers stepped out to make copies of the final documents, that David and I were briefly alone. "You've been planning this for months," he said, his voice a mixture of accusation and grudging respect. The confident executive demeanor was gone, replaced by something smaller, diminished. 3 months, I confirmed, meeting his eyes steadily. "Which is 3 months less than you've been seeing Carla." He flinched at her name, perhaps surprised I knew it. "How did you? Does it matter?" I interrupted. "You weren't careful, David. Not with your messages, not with your receipts, not with our marriage." He was silent for a moment, staring at his wedding ring, which he still wore. "I never meant for this to happen," he finally said, the oldest excuse in the world. "Which part?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "Meeting her? The affair? Or getting caught?" He had no response to that. The divorce proceeded with surprising speed. By summer, it was finalized. I kept the house, primary custody of our children, and 75% of our assets. David moved into a downtown apartment, seeing Alex and Emma on alternate weekends. The first exchange with the children was awkward, all of us standing in the driveway like strangers. David had brought his sister Linda along, perhaps thinking he needed a buffer. I'd always liked Linda. She had a directness that contrasted with David's diplomatic smoothness. While the kids loaded their overnight bags into David's car, Linda pulled me aside. "I know I shouldn't take sides," she said quietly, "but what he did was wrong. Mom and Dad are devastated, but they want you to know they still consider you family." I hadn't expected that. The continuing connection to the in-laws who had become my second parents over 15 years. Ruth, David's mother, had called me weekly since the separation, never mentioning the divorce directly but making it clear her relationship with me existed independent of her son's behavior. "The children need consistency," Ruth had said firmly. "And so do you." After the children left with David, I wandered through the quiet house, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Relief that the legal battle was over. Pride in what I'd accomplished. Lingering anger at David's betrayal. And underneath it all, an unexpected sensation of freedom. As if I'd been carrying a weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Carla, I heard through mutual friends, ended their relationship once she realized David's financial situation had changed so dramatically. She'd been banking on the lifestyle of an executive's wife, not supporting a man paying substantial alimony and child support. The news didn't bring the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange pity for David, to lose both his family and the relationship he'd gambled everything on. Sarah, my closest friend who had stood by me throughout the entire ordeal, brought wine over that evening. "I ran into Carla at the gym," she told me, curled up on my sofa. "She had the nerve to ask how you were doing. What did you tell her?" I asked, genuinely curious. Sarah grinned wickedly. "I told her you were thriving, looking 10 years younger, and dating an architect who looks like a more distinguished version of Idris Elba." I laughed, my first real laugh in months. "Only one of those things is true." "For now," Sarah winked, refilling our glasses. "The universe has a way of balancing the scales." 1 year later, I sat in the garden of the home that was now solely mine, watching butterflies hover over the lavender bushes I'd planted along the fence. The garden had become my therapy in those first difficult months. Digging in the soil, pulling weeds, creating beauty from chaos. There was something healing about working with my hands, about nurturing something and watching it grow. The transition hadn't been easy for any of us. Alex, at 13, had reacted with quiet anger when we finally sat down to explain the divorce. "Did you even try to fix it?" he demanded, his voice breaking in that way that reminded me he was caught between childhood and adolescence. "Some things can't be fixed, honey," I told him, resisting the urge to pull him into my arms like I had when he was smaller. "Sometimes trust is like a vase. Once it's shattered, you can glue it back together, but it will never hold water the same way again." Emma, my sensitive 11-year-old, had vacillated between clinging to me and giving me the silent treatment, as if afraid I might disappear too. She'd crawl into my bed in the middle of the night, her small body curled against mine. "Do you promise you won't leave?" she'd whisper, and I'd stroke her hair and promise the one thing I knew I could control. We were in family therapy, all three of us, learning how to navigate our new normal. Dr. Levine, with her silver-streaked hair and no-nonsense approach, had become an unexpected anchor. Families don't break, she reminded us in our sessions. They reorganize. And reorganize we had. We established new traditions, pizza and board game nights on Fridays, weekend hikes in the state park, pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings. We talked more openly than we ever had when David was living with us, perhaps because the biggest secret had already been revealed. My graphic design business had expanded, necessity being the mother of invention. I'd taken on more clients and discovered I had a particular talent for corporate branding. I rented a small office space downtown, hired an assistant, and found myself energized by the challenges of building something that was entirely mine. The irony of helping companies present authentic images wasn't lost on me. There were days when the weight of single parenthood felt crushing, parent-teacher conferences where I sat alone, taking notes in duplicate to share with David, middle-of-the-night fevers where there was no one to take the second shift, moments of teenage triumph with only one parent to witness them. But there were also moments of unexpected joy in our smaller, tighter unit, spontaneous dance parties in the kitchen, heart-to-heart talks that might never have happened in our previous life, a new closeness with my children that felt like a gift rising from the ashes of my marriage. I'd recently started dating again, cautiously. Michael was a widower I'd met through a client, an architect with kind eyes and a patient manner. Our first coffee meeting had run 3 hours, conversation flowing easily between us. He spoke of his late wife with love and respect, without the bitterness that tinged many divorced men's voices. He understood grief, loss, and rebuilding, though his journey had been very different from mine. On our third date, walking along the river at sunset, he'd taken my hand. The hardest part, he said, is learning to trust again. Not just another person, but yourself, your own judgment, your own heart. I'd nodded, thinking of all the red flags I'd missed or ignored with David. But it's worth it, Michael continued, stopping to face me. Trust is the foundation of anything worthwhile. He couldn't have known how those words echoed in my mind, how they transported me back to that moment in my kitchen, staring at David's phone. David, meanwhile, had been humbled by the experience. During handoffs with the children, he was unfailingly polite, even contrite. He'd taken a position with a smaller firm, lived modestly, and spent his parenting time actually parenting rather than working through weekends as he once had. Dad talked to us about making mistakes, Emma told me after one weekend visit. He said sometimes people mess up the good things in their lives because they get distracted by things that don't matter. I nodded, helping her unpack her overnight bag. That's true. Did that make sense to you? She considered this with the seriousness only an 11-year-old can muster. I think so. Like when I didn't water my sunflower because I was too busy playing Minecraft, and it died. Something like that, I agreed, kissing the top of her head. I never raised my voice during the entire process. I never threw his clothes on the lawn, never created a scene at his office, never bad-mouthed him to our children. My revenge required no drama, just patience, intelligence, and the perfect timing of a woman who refused to be a victim. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the children are asleep, I think about that text message, the careless mistake that revealed the truth. I wonder what would have happened if he'd been more careful, if I'd remained ignorant of his betrayal. Would I have lived years or even decades in blissful ignorance? Would that have been better? I don't think so. The truth, painful as it was, set me free. It forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. It taught me that while trust is indeed the foundation of any relationship, self-reliance is the foundation of survival. As for David, I hope he learned something too. Not just about the consequences of betrayal, but about the woman he underestimated for so many years. The woman who served him the coldest revenge of all, one that came with his own signature on the dotted line. Revenge is best served cold, but sometimes, it tastes even sweeter when served with a legal contract. Did you enjoy my tale of calculated revenge? Hit like if you believe I got the justice I deserved, subscribe for more stories of payback, and comment below with your thoughts. Was my revenge too harsh, or not harsh enough? Have you ever been in a similar situation, and what did you do?